Imagine this. It's a typical Sunday morning and you've reported for duty as part of the safety team and you've arrived quite early. So staff members are still just arriving and the choir is still just arriving and you're patrolling the grounds when you see a suspicious person. They're acting kind of erratically and just doesn't seem like they're really fitting in very well. And so you approach them and make contact with them. And while you're talking to them, their language is kind of weird. The way they're speaking is kind of off just a little bit. All these things that are kind of showing that, hey, maybe you have something more here. And he's talking about his mother and how his mother used to go to church here. And he mentions the pastor. And then he makes a veiled threat. And what he says is, today is going to be the day. And so now your alert level is going way up and he walks away. And he's, now is like he's leaving the property and he approaches a vehicle and he drives away. You immediately notify the rest of the team, hey, we have an issue going on here. Somebody made a veiled threat about the church. And so you call police and the police respond and you tell them what's going on and they say, okay, we'll look into it, and they leave the area. You and the team then decide, hey, we need to be at a heightened alert today. We need to make sure our church is secure and that we're ready for any escalation or any potential violence. And so you go through and you notify staff and other high-capacity volunteers that we're going to be at a heightened alert today because of this interaction. And so now we're getting closer where people are starting to arrive more in numbers. So you get back out on patrol. We need to be paying attention to what's going out in that parking lot. And so once you go back out in the parking lot, you notice that this vehicle is circling around the church, and it's the exact same car that the bad guy was in. It's the bad guy himself. And so what you do is you decide you're going to make some sort of approach. But then he abruptly stops his car, he jumps out of the car, and with something in his hand, he charges right at you. You yell out a command for him to stop. You draw your weapon, and bang, bang, 2 shots into the chest, you stop him. You neutralize the threat. This is essentially what happened on November 12, 2023. A fatal shooting unfolded at the Lake Houston Methodist Church in Huffman, Texas. A man with a history of violent behavior returned to the church after making a credible threat. He approached a safety team member aggressively, and when he perceived an imminent threat, the team member was forced to respond with lethal force. Today we're going to be discussing evaluating threats and learning what the church safety team could do in preparation of a credible threat. An important skill for safety team members and safety ministries to have is the ability to evaluate threats that come into the church. Because depending on the nature of the threat is going to directly affect how far we ratchet up our threat level, how far we ratchet up our proactive measures to stop a threat or to stop an attack against the church. And so we have to be able to properly evaluate. Now, for clarity, we take all threats seriously, but what I'm talking about is, all threats require a certain level. And then anything that's more credible, more threatening, is going to ratchet up what our response is going to be. So let's talk about the 5 key indicators of a credible threat. So the first one is specificity. So the more specific they are in their threat, the more details they have in their threat, the more credible this threat is. So let's look at this Huffman incident. The bad guy mentioned the who, the pastor, the target. And so in other situations, it could be mentioning the church or somebody within the church. Maybe it's domestic violence scenario, but it's the who that we're listening for. The next thing we're listening for is the where. Where is this attack going to occur? This guy is standing in the parking lot at the Huffman incident. This guy's standing in the parking lot on Sunday morning. We have a pretty good idea from the where. They didn't mention it, but in other conversations, other threats, you might hear a where. The other thing is now the when. Are they saying, like this guy did, today's going to be the day? So he's mentioned a target, and he's mentioned the location is implied based on where we're standing, and then the when is today. The other thing would be listening for is the how. Basically, are they saying, hey, I'm going to shoot the guy, I'm going to stab the guy, I'm going to blow the guy up, I'm going to, burn the guy. Whatever it is, we need to be listening to that. The more specifics, the more credible the threat is. The next indicator, we're looking at presence and proximity. In the case of the Huffman incident, the guy is standing in the parking lot. So proximity, immediate. Presence, absolutely, he's there. And so as we look at other threats, though, think about where the threat is coming from. So think about a throwaway threat that might be on Facebook or on the internet against the church. If they're across the country, now we're still taking things seriously, but that's kind of different, isn't it? Somebody just the throwaway comment on Facebook versus they're standing in front of you. So what's their location? Do they have a history of coming to that church? Have they visited the church before? Do they live inside the community? Or are they far, far, far away? That makes a difference. The next indicator is pre-attack indicators, right? These are the behavioral red flags that could come up. Are they pacing back and forth? Are they fidgeting? Are they doing weapons checks where they're patting their side or they're checking their bag or whatever it is that they're doing? Do they have other signs? We've talked about this in a lot of detail in other past videos, so I won't beat a dead horse here. But it's about that vibe. It's the actual physical look on their face and their body that we're dealing with. And if basically your spidey senses are going off, that adds to the credibility of this attack. Another indicator of a credible threat is the history and the context of that person and of that threat. So once again, we're looking at the history of the person if we can know it. If they're a regular attendee, if they're a visitor, maybe they're known in the community. And if they have a history of violence, if they have a history of mental illness, or maybe it's intoxication or addictions or those kind of things, that adds to the credibility of this threat. And we need to take it more seriously. The fifth indicator of a credible threat is an escalation pattern. So I'll give you a kind of an example here. Somebody makes a random threat. And then maybe time goes by. Maybe a month goes by, maybe 2 months go by. And then they make another threat. Okay, now they've made 2 threats. Now maybe it's every month they're making another threat, or it drops to maybe it's every week they're making a threat. Maybe it becomes every day that they're making a threat. Either way, what we're looking at is that escalation of violence, right? The escalation of those threats and escalation of their behaviors that tell us this is a credible threat. Let's talk about what we do when a threat is received. So just a quick reminder, any threat that comes in is going to elicit a response from us. We are going to be at a heightened level of awareness. But depending on the credibility of that threat, how we ratchet up security, how we we're probably going to take more and additional steps, the more credible that the threat is. So let's talk about that. The first thing that we want to do when a threat like this comes in is certainly we want to communicate this threat to our team and to staff and high capacity volunteers. Now we're kind of talking not just about a threat that could occur like it did in the Huffman case, but maybe it's something that came in on an email. Maybe it's a letter that came in. Maybe it was something that somebody reported saying, hey, I was threatened by my estranged husband. I'm afraid he's going to come here to church. Whatever the threat is, right? We need to communicate that with the rest of our team and everybody else so they know that we're going to be ratchet up our alertness level and we're going to be ratcheting up, some of our safety protocols. And one of those protocols, as probably some of you are familiar with, is the standard response protocol of secure. And the idea behind the secure protocol is simply this. Exterior doors are shut and locked. We're keeping people, activities that are planned for outside, those are being canceled. And the idea here is we're shutting out the bad guy. Now, in this case, in the Huffman case, that's a little bit more challenging, right? because we still have people coming in for services that day. But what that does mean for us is this, is the doors are locked and we're monitoring those doors. We're doing our best to keep the facility secure, and should something bad happen, we can easily shut those doors to protect everybody inside. Another thing that we're going to do is we're going to increase our patrols, right? So we got the guy on the cameras, if you have cameras, really watching those cameras and watching them closely. But we're also going to have our team members outside patrolling the parking lot, patrolling the backs and the sides of the church to keep our eyes on there and trying to spot any potential attacker as early as possible. And then if we have the manpower, we're also increasing patrols on the inside, right? Because once again, we have a lot of exterior doors probably, and all of them need to be secured and monitored. The third thing that we're going to do is we're going to verify that all of our equipment is functioning and functioning correctly, to include our communication equipment, right? Our cell phones are charged. Our two-way radios are charged. We're ready for this event. Now I get, for most of us, we should always be doing regular functions checks on our weapons. But one of the things is, if I've learned that some team members can be negligent, shall we say, on good weapons maintenance. So this is definitely time. We're looking at all of those kind of things. If you don't have a regular roll call like they would in law enforcement where you're inspecting people's gear, if you're ever going to do it, it's going to be done on this kind of day, on this kind of Sunday morning with this kind of threat. Another thing that we're going to do is we're going to start preparing ourselves mentally for any sort of escalation or any sort of attack. And so what this means is mental rehearsal. Now, I'm not talking about Hollywood fantasies about how you're going to be the hero of the day because you're going to spot this guy and take him down and there's going to be a parade in your honor. I'm talking mental rehearsal where we're thinking about, hey, if they show up like this and I'm here, I'm going to respond this way. I'm going to, if I have to engage with deadly force, I'm going to engage deadly force, or I'm going to use verbal de-escalation or verbal commands. Depending on the nature of the attack, it might be deadly force. It might be a lesser use of force because deadly force is unauthorized. And you're just kind of thinking step by step, if this, then this, A, B, C, getting on the radio and all that kind of stuff. You're thinking through, you're mentally rehearsing for this violent event. We also want to plan for what to do during the event and after the event. And what I mean by that is this, is while you're mentally rehearsing, that which is great, before that we want to have a conversation with our entire team. Hey, if the attack happens this way, we're going to respond this way. If one of our team members is screaming for help, who's rushing to assist them? Who's holding their position in case it's a way of distracting the team? What is our response plan as a team to this situation to ensure that our team member is fully supported and we're able to win this fight should it be an attack? But also part of that is now afterwards. How do we control what's going on with the congregation? How are we responding to any sort of injuries that might have occurred? Calling police, calling for an ambulance. What's all our after action response? What's our after action plan for immediately after the event? These are just some of the suggestions that you could take if you got a credible threat to prepare your church, prepare your team for any sort of credible threat and any sort of pending attack. But one of the things that you're definitely going to want to do is have regular scenario-based training with your safety team. And it's going to be through those drills and through those scenarios that you're going to learn how your church and how your team is unique. And you're going to make adjustments to the plan depending, right, on what you learn by doing these drills, by doing these scenarios. So I highly suggest that you check out our manual. We got an active shooter manual. We only charge $27 for it, and it's packed with all different kinds of drills. And so it's designed to help you prepare for the drill, run the drill, and then evaluate the drill. And so I just really hope that you check that out. Check it out in the comments section. I think it'll be very helpful for you. The final takeaway is this. Our teams need to understand credible threats, what they look like. Then we need to know how to prepare for any sort of attack should we get a credible threat. Thank you for tuning in today. If you like this video and you want to see more like it, I'm going to ask you to subscribe below. And hey, let's be careful out there.